When forest rangers found a dying veteran collapsed on a remote mountain trail in the Cascade Range, they never expected to see what was standing guard beside him. What the bobcat did next would challenge everything they thought they knew about wild animals and save a life in the most extraordinary way imaginable. The rugged wilderness of Mount Baker's Snoqualmie National Forest in northern Washington had always been James Hawk Morrison's sanctuary. After 3 tours in Afghanistan as a Marine Corps sergeant, the 34-year-old veteran found peace in these ancient Douglas firs and towering peaks that reminded him of a world untouched by war. His weathered hands, scarred from shrapnel, felt steady again when he worked as a wilderness guide, leading hiking groups through the backcountry he'd come to know like the back of his calloused palms. But on this crisp October morning in 2024, the forest would become the stage for something unprecedented. Hawk had been experiencing strange symptoms for weeks. Fatigue that sleep couldn't cure, headaches that felt like thunderstorms behind his eyes, and a persistent cough that echoed through his small cabin like a broken engine. His pride, forged in military discipline, kept him from seeking medical attention. After surviving roadside bombs and firefights, he reasoned, his body could handle whatever this was. The morning mist clung to the evergreens as Hawk set out on what he thought would be a routine solo hike along the Heather Meadows Trail. His backpack contained the usual supplies: water, emergency gear, and trail mix, but nothing that could prepare him for what was about to unfold. The first sign of trouble came at mile marker 7, when his vision began to blur, and his legs felt like they were moving through thick mud. By mile 9, his chest felt crushed by an invisible weight, and his breathing became labored gasps that sent white puffs into the cold mountain air. Unknown to Hawk, his body was beginning to shut down from a rare autoimmune condition that had been silently attacking his organs for months. The stress of his military service had triggered a cascade of inflammation that was now reaching a critical point. As he stumbled along the narrow trail bordered by steep cliffs and dense undergrowth, Hawk had no idea that his next step would change not just his life, but challenge our understanding of the wild creatures that call these mountains home. The collapse came without warning. One moment Hawk was pushing through the mental fog that had been clouding his thoughts, and the next, he was face down on the rocky trail, his body betraying him as completely as if someone had cut his strings. His military-trained mind screamed commands to get up, to keep moving, but his limbs refused to obey. The autoimmune storm raging through his system had finally overwhelmed his body's defenses, sending his blood pressure plummeting and his organs into distress. Hawk's vision tunneled as he struggled to roll onto his back, the October sky spinning above him like a broken kaleidoscope. His breathing came in shallow, desperate gasps that seemed to echo off the surrounding peaks. The temperature was dropping as afternoon shadows lengthened across the trail, and Hawk knew with the cold clarity that had kept him alive in combat that he was in serious trouble. His cell phone showed no signal. The dense canopy and rocky terrain created a dead zone that cut him off from any hope of calling for help. The trail where he lay was seldom used, especially this late in the season. Most hikers stuck to the more popular routes closer to the visitor center, leaving this remote section of the Heather Meadows Trail virtually deserted. Hawk's emergency whistle felt impossibly heavy in his jacket pocket, his fingers too weak to grasp it properly. Every attempt to sit up sent waves of nausea and dizziness crashing over him, forcing him back down onto the cold granite. As consciousness flickered in and out like a dying campfire, Hawk found himself thinking about his fellow Marines who hadn't made it home. The irony wasn't lost on him. Surviving 3 combat deployments only to die alone on a mountain trail in his own country. His breathing became more labored with each passing hour, his lips taking on a bluish tint that spoke of organs struggling for oxygen. The fever that had been building all morning now raged unchecked, causing him to shiver uncontrollably despite the sweat beading on his forehead. Night was approaching fast in the mountains, bringing with it temperatures that would drop well below freezing. Hawk's combat training had taught him that exposure combined with his current condition would be fatal within hours. He was trapped in his own body, helpless and alone, with death creeping closer with each labored breath. The first sign of another presence came as a low rumble through the forest floor, the soft padding of large paws moving with predatory precision through the underbrush. Through his fevered haze, Hawk caught a glimpse of tawny fur and distinctive black-tipped ears, emerging from the dense salmonberry bushes that lined the trail. A fully grown bobcat, easily 40 pounds of pure muscle and wild instinct, stepped into the clearing where Hawk lay dying. This was Ranger, though Hawk had no way of knowing the name the local wildlife biologist had given this particular male. At 5 years old, Ranger was in his prime, an apex predator with razor-sharp claws, powerful jaws capable of crushing bone, and hunting instincts honed by generations of survival in these unforgiving mountains. His golden eyes, flecked with amber, locked onto the prone figure sprawled across his territory. By every law of nature, Hawk should have represented either a threat to be avoided or, given his helpless state, an opportunity. Ranger approached with the fluid grace that made bobcats such effective hunters, his spotted coat blending perfectly with the dappled shadows cast by the overhead canopy. His black-tufted ears twitched as he analyzed the strange sounds coming from the human. The labored breathing, the occasional weak moan, the irregular heartbeat that his keen senses could detect from several feet away. These weren't the sounds of aggression or danger. They were the sounds of something dying. The bobcat circled Hawk's motionless form twice, his nose twitching as he processed the complex scent profile. He could smell the fever, the chemical changes in Hawk's body that signaled critical illness, and something else, a familiar scent that triggered memories buried deep in his wild mind. Years ago, when Ranger was just a kid, his mother had been caught in an illegal snare set by poachers. A human had found her, freed her from the trap, and nursed her back to health before releasing her back into the wild. That human had carried a similar scent, the metallic tang of military gear, the specific soap used by someone accustomed to field conditions. Instead of moving on as any sensible wild predator would, Ranger made a decision that defied every survival instinct evolution had programmed into his DNA. He settled down beside Hawk's still form, his warm body pressing against the veteran's side, and began what would become the most extraordinary vigil ever documented in these mountains. As darkness settled over the Cascade peaks like a heavy blanket, Ranger's protective instincts intensified in ways that would have amazed wildlife researchers. The bobcat positioned himself strategically between Hawk's unconscious form and the treacherous drop-off that bordered the eastern edge of the trail. When Hawk's body began to convulse from fever-induced delirium, threatening to roll him toward the cliff, Ranger used his powerful frame as a living barrier, gently but firmly nudging the veteran back to safety. The temperature plummeted to 28 degrees that night, cold enough to kill a healthy person, let alone someone in Hawk's critical condition. Ranger pressed his thick winter coat against Hawk's chest and back, sharing precious body heat that kept hypothermia at bay. The bobcat's natural body temperature ran several degrees higher than a human's, and his dense fur created an insulating layer that trapped warmth around both their bodies. Throughout the endless hours, Ranger remained motionless except to readjust his position when Hawk's breathing became too shallow or when the veteran's body temperature dropped dangerously low. When coyotes emerged from the forest depths, drawn by the scent of weakness and potential carrion, Ranger's response was swift and decisive. The normally solitary cat rose to his full height, his back arched and ears flattened against his skull, emitting a series of fierce growls that echoed off the surrounding granite walls. The coyote pack, recognizing the threat posed by an adult bobcat defending territory, retreated into the shadows. This scene repeated itself twice more during the night as different scavengers tested Ranger's resolve. Throughout the vigil, something even more remarkable was occurring. Ranger began exhibiting behaviors never before documented in wild bobcats. He would periodically place his paw gently on Hawk's chest, as if checking for a heartbeat. When Hawk's breathing became labored, the bobcat would shift position to elevate the veteran's head slightly, somehow understanding that this would ease his respiratory distress. During Hawk's most critical moments, when his pulse grew so weak it was barely detectable, Ranger would emit low, rumbling purrs that created vibrations against Hawk's ribcage. Vibrations that, unknown to either of them, were helping to stimulate his failing cardiovascular system. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. As dawn approached and Hawk's condition continued to deteriorate, Ranger faced a choice that would determine whether this extraordinary bond would end in tragedy or triumph. Dawn brought no relief to Hawk's deteriorating condition. His skin had taken on a grayish pallor that spoke of organs shutting down, and his breathing had become so shallow that Ranger had to press his ear against the veteran's chest to detect any signs of life. The bobcat's golden eyes reflected a growing urgency, as he sensed his human companion slipping away despite his best protective efforts. The fever had broken during the night, but rather than improving Hawk's condition, it signaled that his body was no longer strong enough to fight. Ranger faced an impossible dilemma that went against every fiber of his wild nature. Bobcats are solitary creatures, programmed by millions of years of evolution to prioritize their own survival above all else. Leaving Hawk to seek food and water would be the logical choice, the natural choice. But as the morning light filtered through the evergreens, revealing the full extent of Hawk's critical state, something deeper than instinct compelled Ranger to stay. The bond forged through their shared night of survival had created an unprecedented loyalty that transcended species boundaries. The challenges mounted with each passing hour. Ranger hadn't eaten in over 18 hours, and his own body was beginning to demand attention. His acute hearing picked up the sound of a mountain stream gurgling somewhere below the trail, but leaving to drink meant abandoning his post beside Hawk. The bobcat's hunting instincts were triggered repeatedly by the rustle of squirrels and the flutter of birds in the canopy above, yet he remained steadfast in his vigil, his muscles coiled with tension from suppressing his natural urges. By mid-morning, Hawk's pulse had become so weak that Ranger could barely detect it even with his sensitive paws pressed against the veteran's throat. The bobcat began to pace in tight circles around Hawk's prone form, his agitation growing as he recognized the approach of death. In the wild, Ranger had witnessed the passing of many creatures. It was part of the natural cycle he understood instinctively. But this was different. This death felt wrong, preventable, if only he could somehow communicate the urgency of the situation to others of Hawk's kind. It was then that Ranger made a decision that would shock wildlife experts and forever change how we understand the emotional capacity of wild predators. The bobcat began to do something that no member of his species had ever been documented doing in the wild. Ranger began to howl. The sound that emerged from the bobcat's throat was unlike anything recorded in wildlife literature, a haunting, desperate call that echoed off the granite peaks with an intensity that made the forest itself seem to hold its breath. Bobcats are notoriously silent hunters, communicating through subtle body language and soft chirps, but Ranger's vocalizations carried for miles through the mountain air, a primal plea for help that transcended species barriers. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a wildlife biologist conducting her weekly radio collar tracking survey from a helicopter above the national forest, was the first to hear it. Through her headset, the sound cut through the rhythmic chopping of rotor blades like nothing she had encountered in 15 years of field research. Her pilot, Marcus Chen, immediately banked the aircraft toward the source of the calls, both of them recognizing that something extraordinary was happening below. "That's not normal bobcat behavior," Dr. Vasquez radioed to the Park Service dispatch. "We need to investigate immediately. Something's wrong down there." The helicopter descended toward a small clearing near the Heather Meadows Trail, where the calls seemed to be originating. Through her binoculars, Dr. Vasquez spotted movement in the trees, a flash of tawny fur pacing back and forth in obvious distress. As they circled lower, the full scene came into view, and both Dr. Vasquez and Marcus sat in stunned silence. A large bobcat was positioned protectively over what appeared to be a human figure lying motionless on the trail. The cat wasn't feeding or investigating his potential prey. He was guarding it, calling out with increasing desperation as the helicopter approached. Every few seconds, Ranger would pause his vocalizations to check on Hawk, pressing his nose against the veteran's face before resuming his urgent cries for assistance. "I've never seen anything like this," Dr. Vasquez whispered into her radio, her voice filled with awe. "The bobcat is trying to summon help for a human. This behavior isn't documented anywhere in the literature." Marcus quickly radioed for emergency medical evacuation while Dr. Vasquez began recording what would become some of the most important wildlife behavioral footage ever captured. The rescue that followed would require delicate coordination between the medical team and wildlife experts, as Ranger showed no intention of abandoning his vigil even as help finally arrived. The emergency medical team that rappelled from the helicopter faced an unprecedented challenge: how to treat a critically ill patient while a wild bobcat stood guard with unwavering determination. Paramedic Sarah Williams, with 20 years of wilderness rescue experience, had never encountered anything remotely similar. Ranger's defensive posture made it clear that he viewed the approaching humans as potential threats to his charge, his ears flattened and muscles tensed for confrontation. Dr. Vasquez descended with the medical team, her expertise in wildlife behavior proving crucial to the rescue operation. She instructed the paramedics to move slowly and speak in low, calm tones, while she established communication with Ranger through subtle body language. The bobcat's golden eyes tracked every movement, but something in Dr. Vasquez's patient approach seemed to register with him. When she knelt several feet away and extended her hand palm down in a non-threatening gesture, Ranger's aggressive stance gradually relaxed. The breakthrough came when Hawk stirred slightly, emitting a weak groan that caused Ranger to immediately move to his side, gently nuzzling the veteran's face. This display of obvious care and concern convinced the medical team that the bobcat was truly protecting, not stalking, his human companion. Sarah was able to begin her assessment while Ranger watched intently, his head tilted as if trying to understand the purpose of the strange equipment being attached to Hawk's body. Hawk's vital signs revealed the severity of his condition: severe dehydration, dangerously low blood pressure, and organ function that was rapidly declining. The autoimmune flare-up had pushed his body beyond its limits, and without immediate intervention, he would have died within hours. As the medical team worked to stabilize him for transport, Dr. Vasquez documented Ranger's remarkable responses to their efforts. The bobcat seemed to understand that the humans were helping, even stepping aside when Sarah needed better access to start an IV line. The most astonishing moment came when the evacuation stretcher was prepared. Ranger approached the medical equipment cautiously, sniffed it thoroughly, then looked directly at Dr. Vasquez as if seeking assurance. When she nodded and spoke softly to him, the bobcat stepped back, allowing the team to carefully transfer Hawk onto the stretcher. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying Hawk toward life-saving treatment, Ranger remained on the trail below, watching until the aircraft disappeared over the mountain peaks. 3 weeks later, Hawk sat in his hospital bed at Harborview Medical Center in Seattle, staring at the impossible footage on Dr. Vasquez's tablet. The video showed Ranger's desperate howling, his protective vigil, and the moment he willingly stepped aside to allow the rescue. Tears streamed down the veteran's weathered face as he watched the bobcat who had saved his life, a wild creature who had shown more loyalty than many humans he'd known. "The doctors said another 2 hours and my organs would have shut down completely," Hawk told the gathered reporters, his voice still hoarse from the breathing tube that had kept him alive during the critical first days. "That bobcat didn't just keep me warm. He kept me alive through sheer determination. He refused to let me die alone out there." The story had captured international attention, with wildlife experts from around the world trying to explain Ranger's unprecedented behavior. Dr. Vasquez's research team established a monitoring station near the trail where the rescue occurred, hoping to study Ranger's behavior patterns. What they discovered challenged fundamental assumptions about wild animal emotional capacity. For months after the rescue, Ranger returned to the exact spot where he'd found Hawk, as if waiting for his human friend to return. Trail cameras captured him sitting patiently on the granite outcropping, his gaze fixed on the path leading toward the trailhead. Preparing and narrating this type of story took us long efforts and hard work, so if you are enjoying the story, please consider subscribing to our channel. The footage sparked the creation of the Ranger Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to studying human-wildlife bonds and protecting critical habitat corridors. Hawk, now fully recovered thanks to aggressive treatment for his autoimmune condition, became the Foundation's primary spokesperson. His first mission was a return to the mountain where his life had been saved, carrying with him a special gift for his unlikely savior. On a crisp December morning, exactly 2 months after his rescue, Hawk hiked back up the Heather Meadows Trail. In his backpack, he carried fresh salmon and a small wooden plaque that would be mounted near the rescue site. As he approached the familiar granite ledge, a flash of tawny fur emerged from the evergreens. Ranger appeared, approaching cautiously but without fear, as if he had been waiting for this reunion all along. The two sat together in comfortable silence, veteran and wildcat, their bond transcending the boundaries between civilization and wilderness, proving that compassion knows no species, and sometimes the most profound connections are forged in our darkest moments. The reunion between Hawk and Ranger became the catalyst for something neither the veteran nor the wildlife researchers had anticipated. Word of their meeting spread through social media with unprecedented speed, generating millions of views within hours and sparking a global conversation about the emotional intelligence of wild animals. The hashtag #RangerandHawk trended worldwide, with people sharing their own stories of unexpected animal compassion and rescue. Marine Corps veterans across the country began reaching out to Hawk, many sharing similar struggles with invisible wounds from their service. The story of a wild bobcat refusing to abandon a dying soldier resonated deeply within the military community, where loyalty and never leaving a fallen comrade behind are sacred principles. Hawk found himself at the center of a movement he never expected to lead, using his platform to advocate for both veteran mental health support and wildlife conservation. The Ranger Foundation's work expanded rapidly, funded by donations from around the globe. Dr. Vasquez established the first-ever research program specifically designed to study emotional bonds between wild animals and humans, with rangers serving as the flagship case study. The Foundation's trail cameras captured extraordinary footage of rangers' continued visits to the rescue site, behavior that persisted even as winter snows blanketed the mountains. Hawk's recovery journey became intertwined with his advocacy work. The autoimmune condition that nearly killed him required ongoing treatment, but rather than viewing it as a burden, he embraced it as part of his mission. He spoke at veterans' hospitals, wildlife conferences, and schools, always carrying photos of Ranger, and emphasizing that healing often comes from unexpected sources. His message was simple but profound. Sometimes salvation arrives on 4 paws instead of 2 legs. The wooden plaque Hawk had installed near the rescue site became an unofficial pilgrimage destination for hikers and veterans alike. The inscription read simply, "In honor of Ranger, who proved that courage and compassion know no boundaries." Visitors began leaving small tokens, dog tags, flowers, photos of their own pets who had helped them through difficult times. As winter deepened in the Cascades, Dr. Vasquez's team documented something remarkable. Other wildlife in the area seemed to recognize Ranger's elevated status, with deer, birds, and even other predators showing unusual deference to the bobcat who had captured the world's attention. The rescue had transformed not just Hawk's life, but the entire ecosystem's understanding of what was possible when species barriers dissolved in the face of genuine need. 2 years after that fateful October morning, Hawk returned to the Heather Meadows Trail one final time before his transfer to a new Veterans Affairs position in Colorado. The path that had nearly claimed his life now served as his greatest source of strength, a reminder that survival often comes from the most unexpected allies. As he hiked the familiar route, he carried with him letters from hundreds of veterans who had found hope in his story, each one a testament to the ripple effects of one bobcat's extraordinary compassion. The trail marker at the rescue site had evolved into something resembling a shrine, with offerings from visitors worldwide creating a colorful tapestry against the granite outcropping. Prayer flags from Tibet fluttered alongside military challenge coins. Children's drawings of cats and soldiers shared space with scientific research papers citing Ranger's case. The simple wooden plaque Hawk had installed was now surrounded by evidence of how deeply the story had touched human hearts across all cultures and backgrounds. Dr. Vasquez met Hawk at the site for his farewell visit, bringing with her the latest footage from the trail cameras. Ranger, now 7 years old and still magnificent, continued his periodic visits to the location, though his behavior had evolved. The desperate urgency of those first months had transformed into something that looked remarkably like peaceful remembrance. The bobcat would arrive at dawn, sit quietly for exactly 37 minutes, the same duration as his original vigil, then disappear back into the forest. "He's teaching us that memory isn't uniquely human," Dr. Vasquez explained as they watched Ranger's latest visit on her tablet. "That grief, loyalty, and love transcend every boundary we thought existed between wild and civilized, animal and human." As if summoned by their conversation, Ranger emerged from the tree line, his golden coat now touched with the silver of maturity. He approached without hesitation, touching his nose briefly to Hawk's outstretched hand before settling beside him one last time. In that moment, surrounded by the eternal mountains and infinite sky, the veteran understood that some bonds are written not in words or contracts, but in the universal language of a heart that refuses to abandon hope. As the sun began to set behind the Cascade Peaks, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold that matched Ranger's eyes, Hawk slowly stood to leave. The bobcat remained seated on the granite ledge, watching with that same patient intensity he had shown during their first encounter. For a moment, time seemed suspended between them, veteran and wildcat, survivor and savior, teacher and student. Hawk took one last photograph, not of Ranger, but of the view the bobcat saw every day, endless mountains rolling toward the horizon, a wilderness that demanded respect and offered redemption in equal measure. He tucked the image into his jacket pocket, next to the Purple Heart that had brought him little comfort until now. Some medals are earned in battle, he realized, but the most meaningful ones are given by those who ask for nothing in return. The Ranger Foundation had grown into an international organization, funding wildlife corridors and veteran support programs across 6 continents. Dr. Vasquez's research had revolutionized our understanding of animal consciousness, leading to new protections for countless species. But perhaps most importantly, Ranger's story had given hope to thousands of people who thought they were beyond saving, proving that rescue can come from the most unlikely sources. As Hawk reached the trailhead, he turned back one final time. Ranger remained silhouetted against the dying light, a guardian watching over his domain. The bobcat lifted his head slightly, as if in farewell, then melted back into the shadows of the forest he had never truly left. What did you think of Hawk and Ranger's incredible journey? Have you ever experienced an unexpected connection with a wild animal? Share your stories in the comments below. We read every single one. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more amazing true stories that will restore your faith in the natural world. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads, because sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones we never saw coming.